My name is Susanna Song. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at Highwire Networks. And thank you again for joining us. You are listening to Security 303, which is about the zero trust approach. I want to thank our Synex resellers who are part of the session this morning. Now, if you joined us 2 weeks ago, you know the drill. We will follow that same format. Our instructor today, David Barton, who is the Chief Information Security Officer of Overwatch, will teach for the next 30 to 40 minutes or so. And then the remainder of the time, we will leave it up to you guys to ask questions. And David, of course, will be more than happy to answer your questions. So please submit your questions through the Q&A button on the bottom of the page. So let me give you a little background on our instructor, David Barton, before I hand it over to him. He has 20 plus years of experience in cybersecurity with companies in various industries, including telecommunications, healthcare, software development, finance, mortgage, and government. So he's been through it all, seen everything. He's been the CISO or COO for several enterprises. And he also spent 12 years working for telecommunications giants AT&T and Sprint. Barton began his career with the United States Air Force, where he spent 5 years developing and deploying classified and unclassified networks. And he's also developed, implemented, and supported security programs in highly regulated environments. So without further ado, let me hand it over to our CISO and instructor, David Barton. Good morning, David.
Hey, good morning, Susanna. Good morning, everyone. I definitely appreciate your time today. I know you guys are busy and the work just continues to grow. So taking time out of your day to spend time with me, I certainly appreciate that. One point of clarification, I am the CTO here at Overwatch. We have a CISO, a gentleman named Phil Bennett. Phil is more credentialed than I am. We both have been in this security industry a long time doing security work. To Susanna's point, I've been doing this a while. I joke that when I started in security, I used to have hair, and if you happen to look at my LinkedIn, you'll find out I have none. And you know, it's a function of what we do. What we do from a security perspective. Now, that's not to say all security people are bald, although that would be an interesting side effect. That's not the case. Today, I want to talk about zero trust, and I realize some of that's going to come to some of you as a concept that you may not have spent much time in. So I'm going to talk to that. I'm going to talk about remote access and how zero trust makes it better, and why the current model doesn't work. If there's questions in the process, please ask them, because I want to make sure I cover the content that you want to see. Having said that, I'm gonna jump right in to. I think I am. There we go. So zero trust. As I was putting the content together, I had my own opinion, and I went and I looked at what everyone else was saying. And if you read this, there's a couple of points here that I think are really interesting. Innately hostile, right? Your network, and as much as you want to believe that you've got all the controls in place, and you may already have a zero trust framework, in which case you're ahead of the curve. But how many breaches have you heard about or seen that are internal, right? That have been perpetrated by somebody who's a trusted employee or trusted associate. If you assume that the network is innately hostile, then you have to put controls in place to protect against even your most trusted people. If you go look at some of the breaches that we've seen, there haven't been a lot of big ones yet this year, or at least not ones that are widely discussed. if you remember, there was an issue with AWS and Verizon. It was a Verizon tech who had admin rights, and she downloaded a bunch of stuff, and it caused a lot of angst in the security community. Um, the point I'm making there is she was trusted, and there weren't controls in place to track, monitor, mitigate, remediate the behaviors that she was exhibiting as she was transitioning out of um, Verizon. So, number one, the network is innately hostile. Two, we should prove or validate, trust but verify that our users and devices are exactly who we say they are. This is a paradigm shift, right? We are moving away from um, complete trust, or even a minimum trust, which is what we used to be, to a zero trust model. So, having said that, I'm going to keep on moving unless Suzanne, interrupt me if there's any questions I need to answer.
Absolutely. No questions so far, but yeah, again, please ask away. Find the button at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A button. Thanks.
All right. So I'm going to keep on moving here. I don't know if you've seen this video. It's a short video. It's funny. Hopefully you find some humor in it like I do. But it's also sad. And as you watch through it, you'll see. Make sure your sound's turned up. Well, I guess you couldn't hear me if it wasn't turned up in the first place. But this is why we need zero trust.
You know, we've been hearing a lot about cybersecurity lately, largely because of what happened to Sony. Companies and individuals are more concerned about the safety and privacy of their information than ever. President Obama has unveiled a number of new proposals this week to crack down on hackers, and he plans to address this in the State of the Union speech on Tuesday. And it's great that the government is working on this, but the truth of the matter is we need to do a better job of protecting ourselves. You know, the most popular password in the United States is password 123. And as long as that's the case, we're vulnerable. So today we sent a camera out on a Hollywood Boulevard to help people by asking them to tell us their password. And this is how that went.
We're talking about cybersecurity today and how safe people's passwords are. What is one of your online passwords currently?
It is my dog's name and the year I graduated from high school.
Oh, what kind of dog do you have?
I have a Chihuahua Papillon.
And what's its name?
Jameson.
Jameson. And where'd you go to school?
I went to school back in Greensburg, Pennsylvania.
What school?
Hempfield Area Senior High School.
Oh, when did you graduate?
In 2009.
Oh, great.
It's like my cat's name and then just like a random number.
Okay.
But,
Have you had this cat for a while?
yeah, she's my childhood pet.
Aw. And what's her name?
Her name is Jolie.
Jolie.
Mm-hmm.
So like a password of yours would be Jolie and then a number.
Yeah.
Like number 1?
Like my birthday,
Oh, when is your birthday?
June 12th,
Oh, nice. And what year were you born?
95.
Oh, great.
Mhm.
So Jolie, 6, 12, 95.
Yes.
Got it.
So you mean to give my password right now? No, I cannot do that.
But we all want to know what it is so we can tell you if it's strong or not.
Oh my goodness. Let me think. Okay, one is Tel Aviv. Yeah. 468, and then Israel. It's only 3, but it's, you know, it's for me it's strong enough.
Ireland, 1, 2, 3, 4. Gemma, 1, 2, 3. Spelled Gemma.
Well, most of them are Italian.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Like
So
what? Like what's a good Italian password?
my grandma's name,
What's your grandma's name?
Maria.
Maria. So Maria is your password?
Oh yeah, now you know my password. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, the important thing is they learned a terrible lesson. Hi, I'm Jimmy Kimmel.
Hopefully that that resonated with some of you. You know, I found it when the Israeli guy comes on, I always laugh at his hair. maybe because he has hair. Two, the other guy who spelled out his password. I also thought that was funny. So let's go to the next slide.
YouTube channel, which
if you think about where we're at today, folks, you know as well as I do that the perimeter has evolved to the point where, the enterprise perimeter really has moved to your device, to your end device, right? To your phone, to your tablet, to your laptop. Some of these stats here I thought were interesting. You've got 90% of the enterprises out there using the cloud today, with 150,000 cloud apps. That's interesting. 8 billion mobile devices, right? And that number is interesting in that there's only 7.8 billion people in the world, right? So, and then when you take that a step further, 50 billion IoT devices. I saw I could have my refrigerator tell me when it's out of water or something, right? It's crazy how many IoT ideas there are out there, and that number continues to grow. But I think that the next two numbers, 81% of the breaches are caused by identity, right? Default or stolen passwords. 80% of them involve privileged credential misuse, right? So if I'm a bad guy and I get a weak password and I find a way to escalate my privilege, I'm going to take advantage of any credential that you give me. Having said that, the enterprise perimeter is impossible for us as security practitioners to protect anymore. We've got to evolve. So there's 6 pillars of zero trust, right? Number one, users. As we saw in that video clip, those are users, right? And they are, be it malicious or unintentional, they are a source of risk for us. So we've got to find a way to validate who our users are, right? I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'll talk a little bit about that too. Devices, right? The challenge we have here is we all have our own iPads, our own phones, our own laptops. We have corporate devices. We've got cloud virtual devices. We have to be able to ensure the trustworthiness of that device, and we can't. So that one's an interesting conversation in and of itself. Network, because the perimeter has evolved, our ability to protect the network is evolving as well, and in a lot of cases is tough. If you look at back 10, 15 years ago, perimeters were pretty solid. You'd put a firewall in place, you'd have an active a directory of some sort to validate users, you'd have AV, you might do some vulnerability work, but more than anything, your network perimeter was most of your security model. Now we have to get to the point with a network where we can transition to a software-defined network. And this SDN idea is going to maybe new to some of you, but fundamentally, standing up a network, or I've heard the term lately, disposable network, where my device is connecting only through the network to the resource or the application that I've been granted access to. That's a temporary network. There's no perimeter to it, right? It's between my device and the end asset. But fundamentally, excuse me, my allergies are kicking in. It's raining here today, by the way, and so my allergies are going nuts. So I apologize. But again, networks are a challenge. As they continue to evolve, we've got to evolve our security model with it. We look at applications. If I'm on your network as a user, and you've got an application on there you don't want me to get to, in most cases, it's impossible unless you do microsegmentation, which is a whole nother topic, to keep me from getting to that application. Now, I may not be able to log in, but given enough time and enough effort, I can potentially get access, right? So applications need to be controlled down to the user level. Automation, this is really how do we respond when there's a breach in zero trust. How do I, if a bad guy gets my credentials and then his device is authenticated, he gets on the network, he gets access to an application, and then we figure out that he shouldn't. How do we respond to that? And then the last piece is the analytics. You've got to have advanced security analytics to understand user behavior, network behavior, application behavior. For example, if I log in as a user, and I typically log in here in Nashville where I live from 8 to 5, and it's outside of those hours, that's an anomaly, right? Analytics should catch that. Doesn't mean it's bad, it just means it's different. And as a user, if I normally go to a finance server, or I don't normally go, but today I'm trying to get into a finance server. Again, it's may not be good, may not be bad, but it's different. It's an anomaly. On the network side, it's the same thing. If you think back to this Verizon conversation I had a little bit ago, this technician was moving data volumes that they had never moved before, right? They were copying customer data out of the network. So unless you're looking at network-based behaviors, you're not going to see that. From an applications perspective, same idea, right? I don't ever get to SAP, but today I've got your credentials. I'm logged into SAP, and I start to pull data. And then, finally, the analytics is what ties it all together. This helps us from an automation perspective, helps us from an applications perspective. The more we understand, the better equipped we are to respond. Now, the thing to remember, if you remember back to my first slide, the distrust or the risk to your network is why we need a zero trust model. What that boils down to from a security perspective is the quicker I can detect bad things, the quicker I can respond. So mean time to detection and mean time to response is what makes us better and more equipped to protect our network. Hopefully that makes sense. So why do we need zero trust? This first picture, I love this photo. Hopefully you're getting a chuckle out of it. We don't understand the problem, right? So we've been trying to apply perimeter-based controls to a perimeterless problem, right? In this case, these firemen did not understand the problem, right? And the problem here is those bracers they've got around their hose crossing that train track is not going to stop it from a 40-ton train. It's just not going to happen. They don't understand the problem. So zero trust is all about understanding the problem. And the fundamental problem is the perimeter's changed, and now all of my data, all of my access is gone somewhere else. So I call this one extreme zero trust. And by the way, this is a legit photo. Hopefully you're chuckling at this one as well. What is this gentleman trying to protect against here, right? This is part of understanding the threat. In this case, there's zero trust. I told people before, if I got on the plane and I was sitting across the aisle from this guy, I might be nervous. The woman in the row behind him, she's oblivious, she's out. But what is he trying to protect? Is he surfing someplace at 30,000 feet he shouldn't, you know. Extreme zero trust is not what I'm proposing, by the way. The other problem that we get with zero trust, and that leads to the need for zero trust, is this false sense of security. You know, back to the Verizon hack, we had an admin who they had vetted, had background checked. You know, they thought they had all the controls in place, in this case, a security guard. But the truth is, without a zero trust framework, you're going to have this false sense of security. So what are the benefits of a zero trust network? Fundamentally, you have a more secure network. I've got controls that are limiting what you can get to, how you get to them. Some of you may say, well, doesn't that create more administrative overhead? And I think the answer, without good tool sets, is yes. And we can talk more about that if you have some questions there. A focus on safer data. You know, what this means is I'm limiting who has access to what data. Zero trust. So when you get access, when Susanna gets access to the network, I assume I don't trust her, and I limit the data she can get to. So fundamentally, I'm improving safer data, if you will. Improve protection against current and emerging threats. If you think about, you know, the last 10 years, the threats that have happened and the breaches that we've seen published, you know, not to mention the ones that really haven't been published. None of those, for the most part, were super sophisticated bad guys. They were leveraging current threats. And so with a zero trust framework, you reduce the ability for those current threats and even emerging threats to have an impact on your organization. If you remember earlier, I talked about mean time to detection. If I can shorten that cycle by having a zero trust model, and if I can shorten mean time to response by having automation and analytics, then the dwell time, and I know this may also be a term that's new to some of you. Dwell time is how long do the bad guys live in my network? Because the truth is, the longer I live in your network, the more I take. Because my intent getting in your network is to take something. About 2 years ago, I haven't seen the latest stat, the average dwell time, and I'm going to give you a dramatic pause, was about 206 days. Imagine what I could take if I live in your network for 206 days, right? I'm taking everything I want. I might take things you don't want just because I can. And so the thing to remember about zero trust is now I'm starting to protect my network against current threats and emerging threats. And fundamentally reducing that breach impact. Because again, if I reduce the dwell time, if I reduce how long you get to live in my world, in my network, I'm going to reduce what you can take. And that is fundamental to why we need a zero trust framework. If you live in a compliance regulatory world, having zero trust means I have better compliance. So when the auditors say, show me this, show me that, when you start from a zero trust framework as your evidence that you give back to your auditors, you don't know how many times I've seen them go, oh, you guys are full zero trust? Oh, this makes my job easy. Because at that point, you are treating everybody as a risk, if you will, and you're taking away all their abilities from the beginning. You're starting at that zero trust model. So you automatically come out ahead from a compliance perspective. The other thing is visibility. So if you hear nothing else on this conversation today, Zero Trust gives me enhanced visibility to my network, right? Enhanced visibility to those pillars that I talked about earlier, right? Users, devices, networks, applications. Having a better visibility means I fill in the blank, reduce mean time to response, and ultimately reduce mean time to detection. And then the last one is potential cost reductions. If you think about Zero Trust, if I start to nail down all of my access, I reduce a lot of traffic, right? If I have centralized authentication for users that's granting role-based access to assets, and I only have a disposable network to that asset, I start to reduce how much network computing I need. I reduce how much storage I need, how much logging I might have. Fundamentally, I could potentially reduce more costs, especially as we think about this COVID environment we're in, and you got folks at home, and your OpEx and CapExes are going to start to go down because you don't need all the computing capacity, and you don't need all those high-powered networks, and et cetera, et cetera. You fundamentally have that ability to start to reduce costs. So let's talk about third-party access, right? So here we have remote access to your corporate network. So I'll just walk you through this slide real quick. In the middle with the danger sign is the internet, right? And so you've got a corporate HQ, you've got dial-up users, although I don't see too much of that anymore. Teleworkers, which I think we're seeing a ton of, wireless hotspots, branch offices. At the end of the day, if you go back to my earlier comment, the network is fundamentally at risk, right? So if you start with that perspective, how do I protect it? How do I start to put some controls around all of these things? And the answer is you don't, right? It's almost impossible. And so, on the right side of this picture, what you're seeing is the applications, right? And the users, and you got partners, and you've got IoT devices. If you think back to the Target breach, for example, it's been a while, but that Target breach was driven by an HVAC vendor account. So your HVAC vendor is your partner, contractor, that you had to give access, and you didn't have a mechanism to limit what they could get to, right? So at the end of the day, it's critically important to try to lock down who's getting access to your high value assets. So how do we get there? Well, you need an identity and access management tool, right, to authenticate your users and your devices. The devices piece is harder, especially as you're looking at BYOD or folks bringing in their own devices. But fundamentally, you've got to have a way to authenticate users and devices. You need a remote access tool, VPN, VDI, and then you need a MDM to keep the devices compliant, right? All of those things by themselves are very difficult, which is why Zero Trust Remote Access has really been built. So if you think about here, you've got VPNs giving access to data because they don't have the ability to go back to those 5 or 6 pillars. They don't have the ability to monitor, reduce risk, to put up a disposable network, whatever. If on the right there, you've got Airbus was hacked through supplier VPNs. So was Target, right? So was Verizon. I mean, we can go on and on. At the end of the day, remote access opens your network up to risk. So, and I think this next slide talks about why the VPNs that we have today aren't enough, right? If you think about the VPNs, you're bringing a third-party device that you have no controls over typically, and you're dumping them inside your network, right? You're putting a VPN concentrator access to the internet, right? Which means it's got opportunity to be attacked all day, every day. You require some network segmentation if you want to do VPN access correctly, mobile device management, DDoS protection, network segmentation. All of those are needed, but in most cases, you can't actually do those without significant investment. And then, I think that fifth bullet, it becomes cumbersome when you've got resources and users who frequently change. With the speed of change in our networks today, this happens all the time. And then, I think the last one, VPNs are siloed, and they don't help you protect on-premise users. So one of the concepts that I haven't talked too much yet is when you think zero trust, it's not just remote access that you're worried about. Being able to provide zero trust framework for internal access helps you, if you go back to that benefit slide, helps you with compliance, reducing breach, on and on. All of those things are valid, and having microsegmentation or zero trust internally is a benefit for your organization. So I think this may be my last slide around third-party access. Firewalls aren't enough. You can't assume your source IP is equivalent to the user. The list on the right is typically static, right? There's not much we can do about it. There's no policy of why you want to allow an IP user or an IP address in that list. And then there's no trust, right? If you go back to zero trust, there's no notion of trust that takes into account authentication. So VPNs are great, but as you think about the bigger picture, the ability to microsegment, and let's go to that next slide. There we go. With a zero trust model around remote access, I can actually limit lateral movement. So just because you have access to an application inside my environment, you can't go anywhere else. I don't expose my VPN concentrator to the internet. There's ways to deploy this idea without increasing more risk. The policies are based on users and groups. So now you've got role-based access controls that say, Susanna can get to these 5 servers, but that's it. And now outside of those 5 servers, there's nothing she can see. And then, the whole compliance conversation with GDPR, HIPAA, PCI, you've got full visibility on the user activity, right? Because we're doing logging, we're doing auditing, those type of things. You reduce your cost of ownership, not buying more appliances. I'm not replicating inbound traffic. So fundamentally, you get better operational efficiencies. And then at the end, you've got, a single platform. You've got a single interface that's managing access on cloud, in the data center, on-prem, whatever you need to do. You get application layer microsegmentation. So, again, as a normal user, maybe I get access to SAP, and so you start to filter and control that access. Now I've got logging, I've got auditing, I've got all of those security controls available and in place for that access. You know, I think the last one's interesting. We support with this approach, managed, unmanaged devices. Don't really care about MDM. If you've got your own device, we're going to nail up a tunnel, a disposable network, if you will, between the device and the asset on the far end. And then when you're done, we tear that down and it's gone. Right? It's disposable. All right, so that's about 35 minutes of you listening to me drone on about zero trust. What kind of questions do we have? Have we seen any that we need to cover?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks, David. We did get a few questions. And again, as David is going through some of these answers, if you have any, please feel free to submit them because we do have about 20 minutes left of class. So please don't be shy. But first question, David, someone is asking, what are the cons to zero trust?
So I think the first con is it's a paradigm shift, right? If you go back to my first definition, it's a paradigm shift. So with every paradigm shift in history, there takes some time to get people to understand what it is. Once you get them understanding, then you start to, once there's some general acceptance to the paradigm shift, then the con of understanding goes away. The other one is you typically have an investment in some legacy tools that maybe you haven't depreciated all of that investment. Right, so you've got some investment, and I get that. Honestly, the biggest con is a paradigm shift. I don't think there's a con outside of now we're going to change the way we do things. So I guess there is one operationally, right? It's how do we deploy, how do we manage, how do we operationalize this idea? And so that's going to take some work. But when you get it done, you're going to find, improved efficiencies, improved controls, more visibility, all of those principles that you get around zero trust. You'll start to recognize those in your remote access.
The second question, one person writes, seems to make sense. What percentage of MSPs, in your opinion, are using or offering zero trust today?
So I would probably say that percentage is low. I went to RSA back in February before COVID shut everything down, and I walked through the vendor floors. And if you've never been, RSA is the largest security conference in the world every year. There were 1,500 vendor booths, and going in, I always try to think about what are the themes that I'm going to see from the vendors, and the two that I expected to see were at the top of the list. One of them was zero trust, and the other one was third-party risk, right? And so because it's so prevalent today, it's still two big buzzwords that we're hearing. My guess is a lot of folks aren't doing it yet. We haven't seen a lot of MSPs or MSPs providing this solution yet. And a lot of it is because they've got legacy solutions that they know and they trust. And frankly, we're not seeing the demand yet from the consumer side because they don't understand what they don't have. In a lot of cases, folks, if you think back to that false sense of security, they think, hey, I've got VPN, I'm great, right? I've got multi-factor, I'm great. That's all I need. Truth is, that's not all you need. You need a little bit more than that. And so I don't have a percentage number. I would just say that I think it's low, But as you think about how this is evolving, and just to give you a data point, you know, Gartner has recently put out a category, and whether or not you like Gartner or believe everything they tell you, I might be in your camp on that conversation. What they do is they do a decent job at predicting trends, and when they see a trend, they give it a new category, and they call it software-defined networks. Or security-defined networks, depending on how you want to call it. But this is where Zero Trust fits in. And so they've got a category for it now. They're starting to put products into that categorization and rate them. So if they're doing that, you're starting to see the mid-market and enterprise focus on it, which means they're going to start asking for it from their vendors.
That's interesting, David. Just to follow up on that, I'm curious to know then, with all these legacy solutions, do you believe that they will eventually, over time, become obsolete, and managed providers will have no choice but to go toward the Zero Trust? Because as we learned 2 weeks ago from Stan, he said the trust but verify is really not applicable anymore in cybersecurity.
So what I expect to see happen is these legacy VPN vendors will start to add functionality, right? Especially if they start to lose deals because their legacy VPN doesn't do A, B, and C. And so what I expect to see is you'll have your leaders that are out there thinking bigger picture, and they've built capability. And then all the laggards will start to add that functionality into their tool sets. Remote access is never going to go away. What's going to change is the Zero Trust model being applied to a legacy Cisco VPN or a legacy Nortel VPN or whatever the case may be. In fact, I saw, just a side note, I saw a demo of a product the other day that kind of bridges the gap between legacy VPN and next-gen Zero Trust. And it sits in the middle. It's another conversation. But it's a stopgap for leveraging existing investment in your VPN world to moving towards Zero Trust.
Thank you, David. One last question. How else can Zero Trust be applied?
So we talked about remote access. There are some organizations out there, and I don't see them much in the MSSP or the MSP world, but more in the enterprise space, who are taking Zero Trust to the enterprise as well. And what they're doing is they're using full Zero Trust to get access to every corporate asset. And that's going to sound like a daunting task, and to some extent it is. If you think about an enterprise, a $10 billion company with 3,000 apps, how do you start to build policy frameworks to implement a Zero Trust model? I would tell you that in those worlds, artificial intelligence, machine learning comes into play, building baselines, building normalization of access and applications and that kind of thing come into play. But I think what you'll see is microsegmentation, Zero Trust, full virtualization of access to applications versus heavy, thick clients. And all of that's going to be predicated on having a Zero Trust framework to, again, focus on the users, focus on the applications, focus on the endpoints, the networks, the analytics, all of that. So if I were a betting man, which I'm not, I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see more Zero Trust on a corporate network and more assumption of no trust for everyone, whether you're CEO all the way down to your part-time people who are helping you file records.
Okay. Thank you, David.